Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. Don't forget our sponsor, Habitly.com. And one of the courses on there is 3 Strands Leadership. I bring this to your attention because today in our podcast, we're going to talk about the power of systems. 3 Strands Leadership, the first strand is systematic power. When I first realized I had leadership attributes, but no real strengths, I developed a 12-step program for leaders addicted to poor management habits. I called it Success with People. It's a pretty good system, but too many steps. 3 Strands Leadership, just 3 steps. The first one is systematic power. Interestingly enough, our guest today, John Nieuwenburg of W5 Coaching, also teaches what he calls a 3-legged school. And the first one has to do with systems. And it's a very good conversation. And I encourage you to listen to our podcast. You can also check out Habitly to learn more about 3 Strands Leadership. But John's got some great tips here. Let's dive in. John, I want to welcome you to the show. And you are like one of the gurus of small business consulting coaching. So let's start off with something that's real easy. And I'm being sarcastic. But what do you think today? You know, we got all kinds of things happening, economy, globally, politically, et cetera. What's the biggest problem you would say is facing small business today?
Well, I work primarily with business owners and doing about 1 million to maybe about 5 million. So just to kind of give you that as a bit of context. And their basic problems have to do with time, team, or money. So what they're saying to themselves is, I've got too much to do and not enough time to do it. I can't get everything done if I don't do it. So they're not very good about managing time. Team is about hiring team. Recruiting, as you know, is very difficult these days. There's a labor shortage. But it's also about getting the right kind of culture and getting people to do the work at the level you need. And then money is got 2 dimensions to it. One part of money is I need better accounting, financials, reporting, KPIs, the metrics, a dashboard. And the other side of money is I need more money. I need better sales and marketing. So if I could summarize what the typical business owner that I meet and what they're complaining about, it'd be those 3 things.
Well, you know, I've had several people on the show that talk about time management, but I would be really interested in what you recommend. I mean, how can they get time back in their week and how much time can they get? And, you know, what kind of examples you got there?
Yeah, so let me start by asking you a teaser question. Would you get on an airplane if you knew the pilot didn't have a navigation plan? Of course not. Would you spend a week without matching your priorities to how you spend your time? Well, that happens all the time. And so the thing that I would recommend is that people need to have a thing called a default diary or time blocking. And a default diary basically answers 4 questions. So number 1 is, what are the most important results I need to get this week? What are those results? Number 2 is, what do I do to get that result? Number 3 is, how much of that do I do? And then finally, how do I allocate my time so it matches those priorities? Now, when I say it like that, it makes it sound pretty easy, but that's not how people generally spend their time. They're usually, you know, so caught up in the urgencies. They get caught up in the, you know, the rings, pings, dings, and buzzes of the phone or the computer, their inbox, that they are always in react mode as opposed to proactively managing their time to produce the results they're looking for. It was Tom Peters who actually said, you equal your calendar, and calendars never lie.
We're dating ourselves by going back to Tom Peters, although he's done a lot of work.
I've got some gray hair, and I notice you do too.
Yeah, I'm up there. So can you kind of spend more time on each one of those, John? I mean, what does that exactly look like?
Which one of those? Time team?
I would start with the first one and move to the move through all 4. But let's just kind of dive in deep, because I think I totally agree with you. I still struggle with time management. Yeah. I looked at my schedule this morning. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I forgot to time block today.
Yeah.
So I was looking and I had 10 hours straight, and I was like, that's ridiculous. I can't do that, even though part of that is heads down writing. You know, I wasn't doing it. But starting with your first one, why don't you start there and let's work through.
Okay. So amongst the first things that I might do with a business owner when we get started is have them do a time audit. So print out, record in some fashion how you currently spend your time and do it in blocks of 15 minutes, quite granular. And the reason you want to do that is I'm going to challenge you, Mr. or Ms. Business Owner, to find 5 to 7 hours worth of work that you should not be doing. That, in fact, somebody else can do a better job of than you do. And what we'll then do is the skill fund box, which is the 2x2 box, kind of an Eisenhower matrix. So on one side, it's skill from low to high, and on the other axis is fun or productive from low to high. So if you can imagine in the upper right quadrant, if you can identify where you generate the most value for your business, and notionally, let's call that worth $500 an hour. Arbitrarily $500 an hour. So why are you doing work in that bottom left quadrant, low skill, low fun, that someone will do better than you for $15 an hour? And so I had a client who grew their business by a multiple of 5 over the course of a year, grew 5x that business. And every 3 months we did that exercise because it became clear, what do I need to be doing more of? And as a result, I have less time to do other things. And so over the course of a year, she sort of escalated up the scale of where she created more value, and then as a result needed other people to help her with it. So, or I can give you a hack. Anytime you say to yourself, oh crap, I need to do something, don't do it anymore. When you're saying that to yourself, it's because it's so tedious or so odious to you that really it ought to be done by others. And nowadays, that's really easy to do. There's lots of freelance gig sites. You can get really talented people who will do lots of work for you that you can get done for as little as $10 an hour, and they'll do a better job than you do. So the question as a business owner that you'd be wanting to ask yourself is to shift the question. It's not, how can I get this done? The question is, how can this get done? And it won't be by me.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that.
So you just strip out one word out of that. And so business owners tend to get in kind of a hub and spoke model, or a kind of a view of their business that they're the hub of the wheel and nothing happens in their business unless somebody consults them on something. And as a result, they become micromanagers and they get caught up in that world and they grow that business until they get to the point where their head is banging the ceiling because that's the max they're capable of doing. And now they're stuck in the place where I don't know how to do this differently. I don't know what to change, where to change. Related to what we're talking about, of course, is that business owners tend to be certainly the ones that are hub and spoke managers, they tend to be very poor at delegation. In fact, they don't really know what delegation is. What they actually do is abdication, and then get annoyed and angry when it isn't done at the level that they need. But that's a whole other topic. So that the most significant thing that you'll want to think about is, or let me put it this way, I'll give you a little bit of a metaphor. So you're the captain of a Navy boat. It's 50 feet, the crew is 10. How often is that captain in the engine room with tools? Could be regularly if he happens to be the best of the 10 on board with the engine room. Okay, great. So now let's make you the captain of a 150-foot boat, and now the crew is 50. How often is that captain in the engine room with tools? It better be never. So that captain's job, even though the title has remained the same, what that captain does changes significantly. So now let's make you the captain of an aircraft carrier, 2,000 people on board. How often is that captain in the engine room? Well, it better be only when you're giving somebody a 20-year certificate, because now you should have a guy who's looking after the guy who's the engine room guy. And so that's how you have to think of scaling, that what you spend your time on escalates, and as you focus more and more on the highest, most valuable things that you can be doing with your time, and as a result, others have to do the work that you naturally drop off.
Well, I also like the way you put the fun component in there. So it's like what you're passionate about. How often do you run across that an entrepreneur realizes, I'm CEO, I'm founder, whatever the title is, but I actually like doing this other piece. and I'll hire someone else to manage the operations or do the sales or whatever it might be. Do you run into that very often because of this focus?
Yeah, so there's Seth Godin calls it the dip. So you start off as a lawyer and you're on your own and you're practicing law. And then you start scaling your business. And then what you're doing as a lawyer changes as you try to bridge this hole, this gap to the place where now the business is running successfully. And now you get to go back to the thing that you started with. I'll just practice law, right? Or do the thing I'm passionate about, or, build cabinets or whatever that might be. So that's one of the common, the common ways things evolve in a business.
Yeah, I think that's cool. So anyway, so the first piece here is focus on the priorities, right? And realizing where you bring in the best value. And then, okay. And what was the second piece again of this time management piece?
So we talked about doing the time audit, which for many people, just the act of recording what they'll do gives them the feedback loop. And of course, that makes you make better decisions right in the moment. And then I think maybe the first thing we were talking about is the default diary, which is to identify your priorities and then allocate your time so it matches those priorities. So many of us don't do it that way. So if there's a habit you could adopt, speaking to the habit guy, there's two that I'd recommend. So take about 20 minutes before the week starts. I know that might sound like Sunday night or something, to have a think about what are the big priorities, what are the big goals, what are the big results that I need this week, and then to map out your week. And then the second most important thing to do in a typical week is to take the last 10 minutes of the day to make your plan for tomorrow. There's a bunch of reasons to do that. Do it at the end of the day while it's all still fresh. Getting it out of your head and onto a piece of paper will let your anxiety will drop immediately because you've dealt with it. It's not just kind of rolling around in your head. Our brain is not very good at keeping those kinds of lists. You'll sleep better, believe it or not. You'll actually sleep better. Your brain is processing that list as you're sleeping. You'll often wake up in the morning with some great ideas. That's why we have great ideas in the shower. It's because we have that space to do that. And so in so many ways, you'll be so much more productive. And the last thing is that when you get to the office, you're not wondering, what am I doing here today?
Yeah.
You've immediately got traction against the list of things that you're working on. So maybe that's three things that someone might consider implementing.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And oftentimes when you come into the office or start your day, you have your plan and you've got a few emails and you've got some people that come up to you, you got a morning huddle, whatever. And then you have a foundation to adjust maybe a little bit based on new priorities, right?
Boy, that's just such a great way to think about it, because we often, if you don't have that foundation, if you don't have a default diary, you're making decisions about how you're spending your time in a vacuum. You're not comparing this new priority against a benchmark of all the priorities you have against that day. And that's why you sometimes starting to feel like you're a pinball. You remember the old pinball machines?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of people spend their time that way, just getting bumped along at whatever's the next thing that gets their attention.
Yeah. I had a thought and just lost it. But, the other thing I want to bring up was, that I'm sure you'll agree with, is that you didn't say it, but you inferred it, John, is that when you're doing that daily plan or weekly plan, you're taking that 20 minutes a week. Am I understanding you correctly? You're building week by week. So you're kind of like, there's an accountability piece first of how did I do on last week's plan? And where do I need to go this next week type of thing? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah. So what I didn't say, and what I get the point of your question, is that if you're making a weekly plan, it's in the context of something greater, some kind of monthly plan, strategic plan, some overarching view of what you're trying to get done that you then bring to the granular level of what does this week mean? How do I balance the priorities, the urgencies of this week against this bigger plan of things that I need to get done, want to get done.
John, you brought up this concept that when you work with people, you said you worked with one guy for a year. He grew his business fivefold in the year. I mean, that's incredible. Throw some numbers on that: 1 million to 5 million, 100,000 to 500,000, whatever. Those are big numbers. That's a big change. And you were looking with this guy, or no, it was a woman, I think you said.
Correct.
This person, woman, entrepreneur, God bless her. And she was able to look at her time, be humble enough to really address where the weaknesses were. But you were helping her at least save 5 to 7 hours a week. Did you find sometimes it was larger? And then I'm kind of curious, what were the types of things that were eliminated in her calendar that created that opportunity?
Yeah, so 5 to 7 is arbitrary. It's just a way of pushing people beyond, the easy, low-hanging fruit kinds of things. And if it was 10 hours, even better. But what the one lens with which you could evaluate this is, where do I generate this? Well, I'll tell you, this business owner owned a business called Fresh in the Fridge. And what she did is she would go into people's homes and cook a week's worth of food. So these are professionals, typically her customers, who come home from a hard day's work and nothing in the fridge. And, oh my God, I'm eating pizza again. So she solved that problem. She would go in a week's worth of food, sometimes, professionals with kids. So when she first started, she was doing this largely with one other person. So she was pretty good at sales. And now she goes from 200,000 to 400,000. Now she has to hire a team. Right now, there's 3 or 4 or 5 people. Well, what does that mean? She's not cooking anymore. Why? Because she can hire people at 16, 15, whatever it was, bucks an hour to do the cooking. She needed to meet more clients, right? So now she grows it to 600,000, and now she's got a team leader leading all the team of people that are doing the cooking, right?
Yeah.
So what happens is you lose, or you focus on the question of, where do I create value in this business? What's the most valuable things that I do? And as a result, what has to come off my table? And then the question, of course, is, how do I do that? How do I make that happen? So that work that others can do for less than $500, which is meeting, typically for most entrepreneurs at this level, they're the ones who are best equipped to meet prospects, to meet clients. And the delivery of the service, the delivery of the promise of your business, you can essentially train others to deliver and lead that activity, while you continue to focus more and more and more on lead generation and sales conversion.
Yeah, I totally agree. Oftentimes the founder is the best salesperson for quite a long time. But I want to ask you about something that a lot of founders don't do well. And you just mentioned it. It's on the team side. It is the training piece. There's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of unspoken expectations that seem to go into when the entrepreneur scales. Yeah. And now, of course, we deal with a lot of entrepreneurs that have been in business for a long time, and they do this poorly. But this whole training piece and realizing how in depth that needs to be. And something I like to say is train and test. So, train for a short period of time. You get the nodding heads, but don't stop there. Then test. Can they do what you just trained? But what have you found really helps your clients grasp this need for training, testing, accountability, moving forward?
So I'd like to start this again with a teasing kind of question. So how do they get those French fries to taste the same in your town or mine or anywhere in the world? Those French fries are made by a 16-year-old, and the parents of that 16-year-old can't get him or her to clean their bedroom. How do they do that? They have great systems. Yeah. And so what does that mean in this context? Well, they have great recipes and they have great protocols. So on the routine things that are involved in your delivery of your promise or service, 3 of the systems that you can have in place is, the first of which is an SOP, standard operating procedure. So the way you would want to go about doing that is you would explain or demonstrate once to the person who you're expecting to do the job. You'd record the meeting, you'd demonstrate it in some fashion, and the first obligation that person has is to write the SOP. Not so you don't do it, Mr. or Ms. Business Owner, the incumbent, the person who's going to do the job, because once they write the SOP according to whatever framework or template you've got, they've then been able to demonstrate to you they have a perfect understanding of what you expect because they wrote the SOP.
So are you saying that I've already got an SOP written? I'm not going to show it to them. I'm going to teach them and then have them write it within the template that I provide.
Yeah. So in the case of Erica, we were talking, well, the first person to do it is going to write the SOP, but now you've hired a second person. Okay, well, let's pull out the SOP. It's 3 months old, 6 months old. Blow the dust off of it. Let's see if it's still current. Okay, we're not going to rewrite it from scratch, but these things age or decay or things change. And so let's check. Let's use this occasion for you to rewrite, to test, to check with the person who wrote it if this is still what we're doing. So there's a vetting process in there somewhere, and there's, again, a transfer of knowledge. Right. Yeah. So that's one of the systems that you'd want to have in place. Would you get on an airplane if you knew the pilot didn't do a pre-flight checklist? Of course not. So what are the checklists you need in your business when you start the day, end the day, go to your customer for the first time, leave the customer? All of those are very well covered if you have a checklist. And then the third thing is that you need a system for communication. And the best one is to have a daily huddle. So that means 15 minutes with the crew. They tell you what they understand they're going to get done that day, and your job is to evaluate if that matches what your expectations are. And if it is, great. If it isn't, then you need to have a chat on the side of the huddle, never in the huddle itself. And so those three things together would go a long way to helping you train the team and ensure that they're getting an adequate level of support and feedback and coaching in order to continue to grow what they do. So if I can give you a three-legged stool on this, I'll give you three ways to think about this. So systems run your business, people run your systems, you lead your people. That's the magic. If people run your business, as they come and go, your business rises and falls with them. If systems run your business, we make French fries. This is how we do it. So the second leg of the stool is that systematize the routine, humanize the exception. So about 85% of what happens in a business ought to be routine. We have a system. This is how we do this. But what happens when one day there's no potatoes? Oh, well, that's an exception. We got to figure out what to do. How are we going to handle this? Today, that's an exception. And the third part of this, though, is you never look for a people solution. You always look for a system solution. So what would the system have to be so that we, A, prevent that circumstance where potatoes don't arrive, or B, we have a system of how we deal with the situation where we don't have potatoes. So if you, that three-legged stool, that kind of philosophy is everything you need to know to get your business to scale. Now, having said that, I make it sound easy. It's not. It's hard, but that's the principle.
Yeah, well, the old saying, if it was easy, anybody could do it. So that's why you have to learn. And how do you teach your entrepreneurs to be comfortable with the mistakes, whether it's their mistakes or their people's mistakes?
Yeah. Well, that goes to the question of delegation, doesn't it? So what's the job of a leader? It's to train and then coach, tolerate, or terminate. So if you've gotten to the point where you feel you've done an adequate job of coaching, training, supporting, giving them every reason, every opportunity, then you got to make a decision. Do you tolerate this or you terminate?
Yeah.
And so, which makes it sound harsher than I mean it to, but it does set the stage or set the culture for excellence, for a standard of performance, right? What entrepreneurs tend to get focused on, in my opinion, is that they get too focused on how it gets done. They don't focus enough on getting the result. So a philosophy I have is, what's an executive leader? An executive leader is someone who hires someone who's better at what they do than you ever will be. So if I'm a president and I grew up in the operations department, I'll know lots about operations, but what do I know about finance or HR or, I'll have some understanding, but I'm not the expert. I have to hire an expert. So what does that mean? It means that I'm managing them to results, outcomes, and I'm managing them to behavior. And by behavior, I mean you have to behave in a way that fits our culture. or to put it on a bumper sticker. Don't do anything that's going to be embarrassing if it's on the front page of the paper.
Yeah.
But anything apart from that, fill your boots.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I'm sure you've seen this too, is that a lot of entrepreneurs take too long to fire. And their team actually knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And it really starts to mess up the culture when there's not the accountability.
Yeah. You're probably not surprised to hear how many times a business owner is asked, what took you so long? That guy's a bozo. But you see what happens there. What the reason I think it happens is because, first of all, it's a very uncomfortable thing to do. And then secondly, it causes the business owner to have to do some very uncomfortable things, which means I got to go out recruiting. I got to go interviewing. I've got to, get off the routine of what I routinely do to look after this project or this circumstance. And I hate doing that kind of thing, or it's outside of my wheelhouse. So I just kind of live with the problem until it gets to the stage where it's so intolerable that something needs to be done about it. The other reason in my opinion, is that business owners would be quicker to make those kind of decisions if they had a bench. And what I mean by a bench is for every key position in your business, you ought to have, in your mind's eye, 2 or 3 or 4 people who, if the circumstances arises, that you could approach and get them in the job. So back in the 70s, gray hair, I was the manager of a retail store, a menswear store. And it was in a city at a time where it was really, really difficult to hire people. There was an oil boom going on in the city. I was in a city where there was it was an oil resource kind of city. Nobody was moving here to get a retail job. And so one of the practices we had is it was my job to take my boss, who was the regional manager, and show that guy who are the best 2 salespeople that currently weren't working for me. And that lesson has stuck with me forever, because if you know who those 2 people are, at any given time, a situation occurs where you need to get a new salesperson. I got 2 good candidates. I've been having coffee with them for 6 months. Right? Yeah. We can easily start a conversation, and you would be way more prepared to make the hard call if you knew, I'm going to go see Pete today. I'll see how he's doing. I could probably get him going next week if push comes to shove. So give yourself options. The circumstance you're describing is when the owner feels that they don't have an option. They don't have any leverage. In fact, that guy's got more leverage because if he quits, I'm hooped. How do you change that? You have to have Mr. or Ms. Business Owner. When you give yourself options, you've got leverage. I don't like what you're doing. I got 3 backups. So you can change the dynamic so that you're going to be more comfortable making those choices because you've prepared yourself. You've given yourself options.
Yeah, no, I love it. I talk about a talent community and forming that. So you've got some people and you've got some things going, you've got options. And I think another thing that leaders forget, 2 things, actually. One that you've already alluded to, when you finally let that person go, or even if you're pretty quick, you almost always find out things were worse than what you thought.
Oh, man.
Yeah. That's one thing. And the second thing I would say is that, and I have this approach I call good cop leadership, where it's like good cop, bad cop negotiation style. So you're always nice, but that boundary is firm.
Yeah.
And, when you hold that person too long, you're actually doing them a disservice.
Correct.
You're teaching them that the bad behaviors are okay, or the poor performance is okay. And you're stopping them from getting a wake-up call and then moving on to a new opportunity in their career. And it can be actually a very positive thing. At least you can do your best to make it that way.
Yeah, if you do it well, it is a positive thing. It doesn't have to be, traumatic or awful. Even if you can just position it as, look, this isn't a good fit. What you do and what you're good at and what we need isn't a good fit. So look at it. You're great. I'm great. But, on the basis of fit, you're better off if you went and did something else. Yeah. So you don't have to make it personal, I guess, is what that means.
Yeah, I think you still need to give them some specifics. so they understand, but you can do it in a very kind, empathetic way.
Yeah, well, when you get to that point where you're having that kind of conversation, the coaching, there's no point in coaching anymore. That's what I mean by that. So I'll grant you that there has to be an awful lot of coaching support before you get to the point where you decide whether it's because you can't or you won't do it. It doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, good point. I mean, you give people a really good opportunity to make it, but they don't. John, I don't want to end on this note. So we're I feel like you and I could hang out for a long time. But if you were to give one last piece of advice before we close that would help people kind of get a whack across the forehead on how they might make that 5x growth in 1 year,
right?
What might that be?
Well, a single thing. Well, I'm going to say that it's that trilogy of the three-legged stools, to come back to that, to make that point that it's about systematizing your business. You have leverage when you have systems. If we think about McDonald's, Ray Kroc, in those days, Ma and Pa ran hamburger joints. One ran the front, one ran the back. Nowadays, they have thousands of stores and billions of burgers and who knows how many fries. And what they changed is that they had more Ray Krocs. Ray Kroc's no longer with us. What they did is they built systems, and the systems can scale your business. So everything in your business, you'd want to look at it through the lens of how can I systematize this?
Yeah, I remember like 40 years ago, I stopped at a McDonald's, which is not my preference today, but and I was sitting there, and unbeknownst to me, a young manager was sitting with a junior manager whom he was training. And I only remember like one sentence out of the conversation where he said, if you look at it, your labor is at 18% of revenue right now, and we need that at 16.2 or whatever it was, 16 something.
Precise.
And it's always struck me, the system approach that you're bringing up. Well, anyway, John, it's been a blast. How do people learn more about what you're doing?
Well, it's easy to find me. W5coaching.com is the website. I'm visible on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, W5 Coaching in all cases. And the easiest way is to go to timewithjohn.com, timewithjohn.com. That'll get you into my calendar.
Fabulous. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate it. Great stuff.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with John. I thought he gave some great tips. If you have any thoughts, you want to give us a rating, feedback, we'd love to hear it. Also, don't forget habitly.com. You can check out my 3 strands leadership system there. It's awesome. Only 3 strands, only 3 steps to make anyone an effective leader. Again, thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. We've got more great guests coming on this podcast. Bye for now.